Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Clauser, with the Center Square's Western Washington correspondent, Spencer Pauly, here to talk about the city of Seattle gearing up for the state legislative session that's set to go underway next month. A lot of attention on the state deficit, but Seattle, in preparing its state legislative agenda, has its eyes on federal policy, specifically federal immigration enforcement and the uptick around the Northwest. Spencer, why don't you tell me what the city is asking the state to do, especially considering that there's not much the state can do in terms of federal immigration enforcement?
Well, it's a little complex, but basically, Seattle's state legislative agenda, what they are lobbying for the state legislators to do, is to just boost any kind of aid for the immigrant community, whether that be undocumented or those that are residents of the United States. Now, what I mean by that is Seattle is a sanctuary city, right? So throughout this whole year, amid the Trump administration's push to further enforcement on illegal immigration, we are seeing Seattle take a stance against that, right? And so despite federal requests for them to comply, they're not doing so. And now the city is asking the state to offer more resources. So what that means is including notices to employees of interactions with immigrant officials, just job wage stability for any detained workers. And also they want more support from the state for the Seattle's public health clinic to boost access for health services for uninsured immigrant communities. Now, remember that public health right now is at a little bit of an issue with Medicaid cuts, right? So that is something that King County and Seattle has identified as a need, and they're not able to do so themselves. So they're asking the state to fill that gap for them. Now, of course, that's all kind of an issue with what you said, that huge shortfall that the state identified that they are going to, I assume, prioritize this coming session. But yeah, when it comes to immigration, the city wants more and more to help with them, because Seattle has boosted their budget a little bit for their Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. But it is a drop in the bucket compared to their other budgets. We're talking transportation, public safety, etc. So that's why they're looking at the state here in regards to that. But of course, there's other things that this city's proposed agenda explores, and that's public safety, homelessness, affordability, all of which I guess the best way to say is ask the state to provide more funding for that to help not just Seattle, but other Washington cities. But of course, this fills a agenda for Seattle itself.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them just leading with this in their proposed legislative agenda. Because, we've talked about it at both the city and the state level. They're both anticipating deficits that they're trying to bridge before the new year for the city, and then in the next few months for the state. But that's largely due to overspending, but also the risk of the loss of federal funding. I mean, the Trump administration has come out, and in this case specifically with the sanctuary city status, saying, look, take these policies down or you could lose federal funding. And you've seen areas like Los Angeles, Seattle, and these other major metropolitan cities say, look, we're not going to do that. But in return, they're losing some federal funding and turning to the state to fill that gap. But at the same time, the state's dealing with the same thing. And that goes right along with the Medicaid stuff. Those cuts to Medicaid are going to impact the state by billions of dollars in the budget. But at the same time, I mean, they're trying to trim down the roles, who's receiving that, and then that comes with impacts to everyone. But it is interesting to see these cities, and instead of saying, "Look, maybe we'll pull back on some of these policies for now," instead they're turning to the state, which in turn passes those costs on to everyone.
This is the first time the city council was briefed on this agenda. This is the first time it was announced. And what this state legislative agenda is Seattle workers kind of expressing what their needs are within amongst the department. So what is listed on the agenda is their needs, not particularly the city council members, but from what I got from yesterday's meeting, which I covered on this, none of the council members really had anything against the proposed priorities, I should say, but they can add amendments which they are proposing. Now, one thing I
Hmm.
note, and they're talking about very specific ideas, right? So, Councilmember Bob Kettle, he talked about it's the state's responsibility to fund mental health programs. That's just an example. Now, I think that's the sort of rhetoric we're getting here is cities saying, well, we can't do all this ourselves. This is the state's priority. And I think that's what a lot of this here could be perceived as is priorities that they're saying we can't be responsible for this. We can't be responsible for this funding that we need. Instead, it should be the state's responsibility.
Yeah, but at the same time, that they're really leaning into these policies, and it makes me wonder what the end result is going to be. Because I mean, we can talk about, yeah, the state's supposed to fund those mental health programs. They're
Yeah.
supposed to fund felony court and stuff like this. But at the same time, the city of Seattle receives a large share of law enforcement funding from the federal government, and I understand these. Provisions around immigration and the legislative agenda, they're not pertaining to that law enforcement funding. But that could be the risk of continuing to lean on these sanctuary city policies,
Mm-hmm.
is that you lose that, and then you're facing bigger gaps. And it is interesting to see, this is what residents are asking for. It's not just the city council or the new mayor or the mayor on the way out. It's what residents want. But in the end, if they do lose that funding, it's not just the mayor and the city council footing that bill. It's going to be those residents that are also footing it.
That's true, and I think the city's going to take a real close look at what's going to happen in the upcoming session because I think what we're seeing here is a cause and effect. If the state, whatever this happens at the city's going to have to find ways to fill those gaps. That we have to assume the state's not going to fill all these gaps that have been identified in this agenda. So what does that mean? You might see proposed taxes. I mean, this is something that the new incoming mayor, Katie Wilson, her platform down is progressive taxes, but we shall see if how that comes to fruition. But we could see increased property taxes or anything like that could help fill these gaps in an immediate need because, like you said, not is it just the state, but the city here has a general fund deficit every year, including 2026. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what happens based off of what comes out of this coming session.
Yep, it will definitely keep our eyes on it, Spencer. And you just spoke to that a little bit. Everyone loves the term affordability, and I would love for things to be more affordable. But when
Right.
you have the state and federal government stepping in, that affordability falls on the backs of taxpayers. So, Spencer, we'll continue to keep our eyes on this as you cover this at the city level, and our other reporters covered at the state level and the federal level. But thank you again. And for any of our readers hoping to catch Spencer's story, you can read it at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.